Hello and welcome to another Symbolic Studies live stream. I appreciate you being here if you're live. That's really cool. I have an interesting presentation for you all. And if you're catching this after the fact, welcome. I am Mario, in case you're new to the channel. And today we're going to be talking about the Tower card. So I built up some momentum with Aries this season, and I felt like I really wanted to explore more symbolism having to do with Aries, and I decided to do a presentation on Mars recently, earlier this week. So if you have not seen that, I suggest you check that out. I did that on Tuesday, the day of Mars. And when that was wrapped up, I felt like there was still more in me that I wanted to unpack. And so I decided that I would explore more Mars symbolism via the Tower card, because under most common systems with the tarot, the Tower card corresponds with the red planet Mars. And it makes a lot of sense. You know, once you start decoding the card, seeing what it's all about, the Mars energy is definitely there in full force, as we will see for sure. But before we get into the presentation, which consists, by the way, of all of my personal tarot cards. So, what I did was I pulled 20 something cards from my tarot collection, and I'm going to be going through all of the Tower cards from the newest version that I have in my collection, which is from 2019, going all the way back to some of the oldest cards that I have around, which are definitely reproductions. You know, I don't have any original cards from the 15th century, but I have several decks from the 15th century. So when you look back at the cards, there's a lot of interesting details that start coming to light. That was one of the things that was really apparent with the Emperor card presentation, is the fact that older emperors have a different look. They kind of have a different vibe. And so just kind of going through the cards, through the centuries, through the ages, it's really fascinating. And I figured that's what we'll do here. But before we do that, if you want to support the channel, you can like, share, and subscribe. Also, you can leave me a super chat if you're feeling what I'm putting out there. That would be very much appreciated. And the like, share, subscribe thing, obviously, you guys hear this from like every single channel, but it does go a long way with the algorithm and all of that. So please do that if you're so inclined. And also, if you really want to support the channel in a different kind of way, you can become a patron. So patreon.com/symbolicstudies is where you can find my Patreon page. And huge shout out to all of the current patrons that I have right now. Much respect, much love. And that'll do it. So what I'm going to do here is hide my screen because it's no longer necessary, and it's just kind of it's covering up the beautiful artwork on the screen there. And okay, there we go. Still learning the behind the scenes stuff with StreamYard. So you guys should be able to hear me now, but not see me. So let's just get into it. To kick things off, the first card that I have for you guys is the Golden Art Nouveau from 2019. And so clearly you can see the full card on the left, and then you can see a zoomed in portion of the card on the right. And I absolutely love this deck. This deck is actually what I use for tarot readings. So that's another way to support the channel. Or if you're interested in a tarot reading, you can reach out and I'd be happy to give you one. I also do consultations and study sessions based around the tarot as well. I've had a number of people reach out for consultations, and they want to dive into a specific card, or they want to know my methodology behind my readings, things like that. They want to go through the major arcana. So if that's of interest, definitely reach out and we can get something scheduled. But this is the deck that I use for tarot readings. And it actually looks a little more chaotic when we're looking at it on the screen here, because what you see in the background, that's actually gold foil, and it looks a little different in person than it does here online. But the reason why I use this deck is because it's essentially an updated version of the Rider Waite deck. And so most of the traditional symbolism is intact, but they've clearly re-illustrated everything. And I personally just think that they did a beautiful job. So symbolically, this is very similar to the Rider Waite deck. You're not going to see anything too new here. You have the classic tower in the middle. Here it looks very strong, which is what really tower symbolism in part represents. You know, it represents this strength, it represents unity in a lot of different ways, it represents stability. There's a strong foundation to this tower. And so when it comes crashing down, it means that that stability has gone away, obviously. It means that that structure or all of the energy that was required to build the tower, now it's being destroyed with a different kind of energy, right? An energy from the heavens, from above, from God. And this is going to be something that I talk about quite a bit, actually, is the Tower of Babel story. And it's been something that I've gotten very interested in recently. And essentially, I think that the Tower of Babel story says a lot about the meaning behind the Tower card. And so I will be getting into this storyline just throughout the presentation, and we'll fill in some gaps with what I think the story represents, and then how it's been kind of translated and how it corresponds with the Tower card. So you'll see that obviously there's this large tower, and generally in a lot of other cards, you're going to see a very obvious lightning strike hitting the top of the tower. Here, you can't see it as much, if at all. And then you also will see that crown kind of coming off the top. This isn't uncommon either to have this crown. And crown symbolism is really interesting. I've said this multiple times before, but we come into this world head first. So we crown, right? When we're being born, at least most of us do. And so crown symbolism is related to the head. And when you're dealing with the head, I can't not think of Aries, which is the head of the zodiac. It's the first sign of the astrological year. And so everything about Aries, the ram, which is ruled by Mars, right? Everything implies a headstrong sort of nature. And so the fact that there's this crown on top, to me, signifies several different things. But one of the things it also represents, I would say, is because of this head symbolism, I can't not think of the fact that a tower is essentially a phallic object. And, you know, obviously the phallus has a head at the very end. And so one of the things that I think is appropriate to talk about with this card is the fact that there is a sexual symbolic thread with the tower. So to me, I think of ejaculation, I think of the orgasm, and I think that that's partly what's being implied here in a few different ways. And so we will unpack this throughout the presentation. But just to start laying a simple foundation for this this Tower of Babel myth is that the whole idea was that the Babylonians came together, there was a unified language, and they wanted to build a tower that stretches from earth to the heavens, okay? And this was going against God's will. And so once they got to a certain point, he actually completely changed the dynamic of the project, because he introduced new languages into the community. And so therefore, all of the people that were once coming together to build this tower, they were no longer able to communicate with each other, and therefore they weren't able to complete the project. And so this is where we get babble from. And, you know, when someone's babbling, and that's what happened according to this storyline, is that all of a sudden no one could understand each other. And so it was literally just gibberish or just babbling. And so they were no longer a unified sort of force. They no longer could complete the tower. And essentially, this led to a scattering of this people, that these people ended up going in different directions, and they started new villages and new towns and things like that. And they obviously had their own languages. And so this unified people became broken up. And so this card has a lot to do with destruction, with things breaking down. The traditional correspondence or the traditional meaning behind this card has a lot to do with swift change, sudden change. Um, and so when it comes up in a reading, that's usually what's implied. And, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this card generally, but you most oftentimes will see two figures falling from the tower. It's not uncommon for there to be a woman and a man, or somebody dressed in blue while the other person is dressed in red. Um, and I feel like now would be a good time to mention the fact that the Tower of Babel was also known as the Tower of Confusion as well. And just look at this scene here. Chaos feels very confusing, right? But it's completely necessary. Or a lot of times, destruction and war can feel very, very confusing. But it's part of just what happens here. And so the way I look at it is, and this comes from Crowley, I believe this is his quote. He said something along the lines of, destruction is the first act of the creative energy. And so, in order to create something, something needs to be destroyed. So, in order to cook a meal, you might have to crack a few eggs. In order to build a home, you might have to chop down some trees, etc. So, this card is all about that destructive force. And so, it makes perfect sense, right, that it would correspond with Mars, which is the planet of war. And so, those are a few thoughts just off the top of my head. So let's proceed to the next card, and we will continue talking about all of the symbolism associated with the tower. So this card is from a deck called Ethereal Visions, which came out in 2018. And there's a few unique things going on here. It's not as detailed as the last card, but there's a couple of little details that I really appreciate. And the first being the fact that the man falling from the tower is wearing a mask. So, what's the mask all about? I think there's a few ways to interpret this. If you're looking at it through the lens of the Tower of Babel story, one of the things that the Lord or God said was that these people wanted to reach the heavens, right? This is the nature, by the way, of all buildings. The tower was considered to be the first skyscraper, the Tower of Babel. And so when you're dealing with skyscrapers, when you're dealing with towers, when you're dealing with obelisks, or you're dealing with trees or standing stones, you're dealing with very similar symbolism, in my opinion. And the tower, what it ultimately represents is the world axis or the cosmic axis. And this is the point in which the heavens revolve around. And generally, there's a northern correspondence with the cosmic axis. And so the cosmic axis, essentially, it's a bridge between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. So this is what Mercury, this is what he travels on, the psychopomp, the messenger of the gods, right? And so the guide of souls. So he uses the world axis as a means to go from realm to realm. And so a very similar metaphor for this world axis being a bridge that way would be the world tree or the cosmic tree, which I've made presentations about. And so the cosmic tree, think about the trunk of the cosmic tree and then look at this tower. It's a very similar sort of idea, in my opinion. And actually, we will see a tower card that I have in my collection, a very old one from, let's see here. Let's see, because I have it right here. Right, so it's from 1650. So that's a pretty old deck, but there's a card that we'll be looking at later on in the presentation where instead of a tower, it's actually a tree, because the symbolism to me is very, very similar, right? And so Even the fact that tower starts with T and then tree starts with T, there's this interesting T connection with the world axis and with tree symbolism for sure. But the fact that this character is wearing a mask, I think it's speaking to this idea that what God had said before he switched up everyone's language, what he said was that these people want to see the glory of heaven, yet they have not earned it. And so he took issue with that. And so they basically were, in his eyes, they were acting out of line. They weren't supposed to be creating this because it was almost like they were worshiping, in a way, a false idol. And also too, one of the sub storylines with the Tower of Babel story is that they were at war with God, and so they were kind of competing with God by creating this tower. That's at least what the storyline suggests. And so the fact that this person is wearing a mask, I almost look at it like he was attempting to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. He wanted to ascend to the heavens. He wanted to experience the glory of God, but it's not his time yet. It's not his time, which is kind of delusional to think that you can actually traverse that much space and commune with God or the gods, if you will. And so to me, this mask is kind of potentially maybe alluding to this, alluding to, the idea that he thought he was something that he was not. He thought he was able to go up to heaven and see the pearly gates, or, build his empire up in the sky. And he's not that person. The whole story behind the Tower of Babel is that humanity was humbled to a great degree. And so, in some ways, even when I just look at this artwork, I'm kind of reminded of Icarus flying too close to the sun. And what happened was his wings melted, his wings that were brought together with wax, they melted from the heat of the sun, and then he fell back down to earth. And so, what this is really saying, too, by the way, is that there's a major fall from grace. And so, yes, you might be able to build a tower. You might be able to be up in the, in the highest floor of that tower, and you might think you're one thing, but in actuality, you're not. And so, in some ways, this kind of just reminds me of the hierarchy between man and the gods, or man and God. And so, to me, this mask is implying some of these ideas. The other thing I really like about this card is that eye just above the tower. It's part of the frame there. And eye symbolism is something that you will see brought up multiple times throughout these decks with this card, because the world axis or cosmic axis has a correspondence with the North Star. And the North Star, in my opinion, it can be said that this is the eye of God. And so the watchful eye of God. So Polaris, the North Star, exists in the northern sky. And this is the point in which the heavens revolve around. And so there's a direct link between this world axis being a cosmic axle and stretching from the North Pole to the North Star. And so this eye has been referred to as like an eternal, ever watchful eye that's always looking down on humanity, and its position doesn't change. And so its position throughout our lives, it's going to be in the same spot day after day after day, night after night after night. It doesn't leave its location. Obviously, with other luminaries, with wandering planets, they are moving around all the time. So the sun is constantly moving around. It goes symbolically down to the underworld, and then it rises in the morning. The moon is always shifting and changing and everything else. So it's related to cycles that way. But the eye of God, Polaris, which is where, by the way, the symbolism suggests and is basically outright said that this is where the throne of God exists. So there's a relationship to the northern sky, this eye of God, Polaris, the pole star, and the throne or house of God. And that's actually another name for this card, is the house of God. And so I actually did a video called Illuminati Symbolism. I did a presentation where I broke down eye symbolism more thoroughly than I ever have anywhere else. So if you want to learn more about that and how the eye symbolically, it can be said that it's a representation of Polaris, the pole star, definitely check that one out. Also, just want to mention real quick that what you see as being black in this card is actually silver, and so it's silver foiled, and so it looks a little bit different here. But you can see that they're alluding to these lightning bolt strikes, which will be more obvious in other decks. And so this deck is called Pagan Otherworlds, and this is from 2016, right? And so I do like this deck quite a bit. And so there's a very sort of natural look to everything. It looks very organic. But here you see a woman, she's falling from the tower. And I think it's interesting that there's so many different ways of kind of showing the fall from grace. Sometimes it's one person. Here, the deck creator wanted just to have one woman falling from the tower. Sometimes there's multiple people. And so I'll be pointing that out throughout the presentation. The fact that there's a difference with how many people are actually falling, what they look like, etc. Sometimes they're falling like face first, you know, sometimes they're looking back from where they were. So to me, this is pretty standard as far as the symbolism is concerned. You see the stairway on the right-hand side leading up to the tower, and obviously it's implied that she was at the top of the tower and now she is falling down. And so to me, this is another interesting sort of thing that I've noticed with the tarot a lot, is that a lot of symbolism within the tarot, especially in the major arcana, it's what's the right word? It is kind of inverted, or sometimes what's being played with is in contrast to what you would assume the card is about. So as an example, the tower, you know, what I was saying earlier is that it's strong, it's phallic, it brings order, it brings stability. One of the things I've learned over time is that towers and standing stones and family trees and things like that, they oftentimes marked a sacred center location. So a lot of times towers are actually built very strategically, that it wasn't just built anywhere, that there was a very good reason for where it was built. Sometimes they're built literally in the center of the village, or they're built in the center of the region from which they live. And, you know, there's also various sort of things going on with tower symbolism that is marking the location of, you know, where perhaps their family tree used to be, or where people have been buried, burial mounds, things like that. There are these sacred center locations all over the world, and sometimes they change hands. So, you know, what was once considered a Native American sacred center location, where there was a burial mound, as an example, later on, you know, Westerners might come and they might build, you know, a church right on top of it. But there's this understanding that that specific location has a particular resonance, and it's powerful. But what I was going to say about this kind of inversion sort of thing is that the tower implies all of these things, you know, this phallic sort of masculine kind of energy. And what you see, though, in all of these cards is this tower that represents these things being brought down. And so this is something that I've noticed with so many different cards. The other classic example I have of this is like with the strength card. So the strength card corresponds with Leo. Generally, you know, when people think of Leo, they think of a lion. They think of this beast who's very capable of taking care of themselves and their family, right? Yet in the strength card, it's not uncommon to see the lion with its tail between its legs, looking very, very timid and looking like it's being tamed. And so to me, this is one of those things where they're kind of playing around with the symbolism. Yes, the tower represents all of these powerful things, but the tradition is to show this tower actually being brought down. So even though it's powerful and represents order and structure and has this ascension sort of component with it, it's not beyond, the fact that it can actually come down, especially from the wrath of God or from the wrath of a higher sort of entity. Um, and so I just felt like that was worth bringing up. But otherwise, this card here is pretty straightforward, in my opinion. And up next, we have the Tarot of the Holy Light deck, which is from 2015. This deck breaks so many rules in all the best of ways. I love this deck. I think it's fascinating. There's a few little details that I've seen in other cards that are very, very interesting. And there's a few cards too that are part of the major arcana that I'm still like wrapping my head around. I'm wondering what is going on here? What's implied here? And just so that you guys are aware, the way this deck was constructed was the deck creator acquired a lot of older alchemical illustrations, and she decided to bring these illustrations together and essentially make collages. And so this is a collage of different illustrations. And I think it's a cool technique personally. And yeah, so this is just her version of the Tower card, which here she calls the Tower of Destruction. So that's another interesting thing that I've noticed. Perhaps more than any other card, there are varying names, more varying names for the Tower card than maybe any other card in the Major Arcana. So here she has Tower of Destruction. We're also going to see the Blasted Tower on another card. We're also going to see the House of God with another card. I already brought up the fact that the Tower of Babel is called the Tower of Confusion as well. So I think that's kind of intriguing. The fact that there's multiple names for this card, while there's other, cards that basically are called the same thing pretty much universally. The other thing that's a little different here is the fact that she corresponds the tower with Capricorn. And that's kind of interesting in a number of ways because obviously Capricorn is ruled by Saturn and it's a very earthy sign. And the traditional card that corresponds with Capricorn is the Devil card, which usually corresponds with the Hebrew letter Ayin, which means I. And so that will actually be something that we'll see throughout these decks as well, is that the Hebrew letter correspondence for the Tower card will switch from Peh, which means mouth, to Ayin, which means eye. And so that's intriguing because we're going to see even more cards with eye symbolism and all of that. But the Peh correspondence, meaning mouth, I think is fascinating because of the Tower of Babel and the fact that their languages were given to them, breaking up their sort of unified empire. And, there's a lot to be said regarding the mouth, Peh, and communication and all of that stuff. But to get to this card here, you see a very unique tower and you see even more unique characters around. And I can only imagine what she was attempting here with these figures. If you have any sort of insight regarding specifically the winged figures here, to me, they look like hybrid demonic. I don't know if these two figures, if their bodies are part of the Goetia, the Goetic demons. I wouldn't be surprised. It kind of looks like that, but then obviously they have human heads. You have what looks like a man on the left-hand side and then a woman on the right-hand side. And then you have three figures falling from this tower, right? And then it kind of looks like an alchemical flask right there in the middle of the tower. And I could be wrong on that, but there's also a cone just below that little vessel there. So I'm getting alchemical vibes from that vessel or flask. And I'm just getting alchemical vibes from this card as well. But honestly, most of her cards um, imply or allude to alchemical works and understandings and processes and things like that. So she, it would not surprise me if this is supposed to represent a very specific alchemical process, which I haven't even looked into it deeply enough. So I'm unaware. But if you have a hunch, you should definitely leave a comment down below or type something out in the chat about what we are seeing here. But what I'm thinking about is that these creatures with wings, they look like they're coming from another dimension, another plane, perhaps from the heavens, perhaps from the underworld, and they are part of the destructive force, right? And then you have the common people, the earthly people, falling down to the ground. And so, beyond just a lightning strike, it appears as though there are entities here helping in the destruction of the tower. So that's just what I'm picking up. I think it's really appropriate too that there's a red roof, and the fact that it looks kind of like a triangle, I think is intriguing. The upward triangle, right, is the alchemical sign for fire. And so when you're looking at those signs, the upward triangle is fire. Very appropriate, kind of given, what's going on here. So yeah, so there's more to decode here for sure. And then this card comes from the Night Sun Tarot from 2014. And to me, this deck is really interesting. There's a few cards that I absolutely love. There's a few cards that I'm kind of meh on personally. This is, this gets me thinking. I'm not sure exactly what's being alluded to here, but there's a few details that are absolutely worth unpacking. So the first thing to me is that this tower looks like a meat grinder. It looks to me like there's a meat being ground up in the tower and it's being spewed out from that opening there on the side. And so it makes me wonder if that's actually what's being alluded to here. This tower being a meat grinder, which now that I think about it, this is really fascinating because in the Tower of Babel myth, a number of people died during its creation. And I believe the biblical sort of take on things is that it took 43 years for this tower to be built, and it wasn't even completed yet. That's another thing that I think is really, really intriguing. The tower was not completed before everyone's language was introduced, before this confusion, before communication was cut off between each other. And so there were people who died, and this was a 43-year long effort. And my understanding is that people more so mourned the lack of progress. Say if a brick fell, the official the official thing regarding how long it took to build is also coupled with this stat, which I think is intriguing and could be unpacked. There's a lot of symbolism going on with all these numbers, but it was said that it would take somebody 1 year to carry bricks up from the bottom of the tower all the way to the top. And when a brick fell, everybody mourned because they were sad that they were, they missed out on the opportunity to lay one more brick, and that it would be that much longer until they're able to reach the heavens. Whereas when somebody fell to their death, it wasn't even, my understanding, according to the storyline, it wasn't even that big of a deal. And so literally the amount of effort it took to build this tower, according to this myth, is staggering, which is fascinating too, because look how quickly it came down. So the collective effort of all of these people building this tower was thwarted very quickly. And in the context of this card, it was thwarted or brought down almost instantaneously, basically with a lightning strike. Everyone knows how fast lightning can strike. And so there's this energetic sort of exchange going on here, I would say. And that lines up perfectly with Mars, which you can see the Mars glyph in the upper left-hand side of the card. And so Mars is very much related to action, to passion, There's a reason why the Mars energy corresponds with Aries, the ram. The ram is always moving forward. The ram is an excellent climber, and they have those big, powerful horns. So they're able to clash heads and butt heads, with like great, great force. And so is the meat grinder, sort of symbolism here is alluding to the fact that it took a lot of people, it took a lot of lives to actually create this project. And that's another thing. If you're going to accomplish something amazing, if you're going to do something that has never been seen before, if you're literally trying to bridge the gap between earth and the heavens and you're creating this symbolic bridge, then yeah, it's going to probably require a lot of sacrifice that people are going to be killed in the process. So the Great Wall of China, the pyramids at Giza and elsewhere, must have been the same thing, that you're dealing with such big bricks, you're dealing with such great heights, and you're creating this thing that's absolutely massive that you can pretty much guarantee that there's going to be casualties with all of that, which again, very, very appropriate for Mars. Um, because Mars and Aries season has a huge correspondence with sacrifice. So there's a reason why the Passover story happens during this time of year. There's a reason why Christ was crucified during this time of year. A lot of kings and emperors have been killed during this time of year, like Caesar. So this is where we get "Beware the Ides of March" from. So there's a lot to be said about all of that stuff, but that's definitely the vibe that I pick up with this card. I'm sure you guys can see all of that too. One small detail, though, that I think is fascinating as well is the fact that you see these balances on the corners of the building, these scales. And to me, that's intriguing for a few reasons. But the main reason is that Aries corresponds with Mars, and opposite Aries, the polarity of Aries is Libra. And so they're both at the equinox point. So obviously, Aries ushers in the spring equinox, and then the fall equinox is brought in with Libra. And so the balances in part, there's so many things to talk about with the scales, but the balances in part um, is alluding to the idea that at the equinoxes is when you have equal parts day and night. And so that's the deal. Obviously, in the summer, you're going to have more light and the sun is going to set much later. In the winter, it's the exact opposite. So there's just more darkness around. But at Aries and Libra is where things are in balance between day and night. And so the fact that you see these scales, it must be alluding to this, in my opinion. Also, too, the thing you'll notice up top is you see this kind of point or what kind of looks like an antenna on top of the building. And so when you're dealing with towers and obelisks and things like that, I always think of antennas as well. And the fact that an antenna projects and receives information. And so years ago, I heard that a lot of the, or all of the air signs kind of look like antennas, or it's two lines that are communicating with each other. So the most obvious one would be like the Gemini glyph. So you have these two vertical lines, Roman numeral 2, and it's almost as though each vertical line is an antenna, communicating back and forth to each other. And so there's a lot to be said regarding antennas, this communication, and sword symbolism as well, which reminds me that part of the Tower of Babel story is the idea that the game plan was that they were going to build this tower, and at the very top, they were going to put a statue of a figure holding a sword to the heavens. And this was implying that they are willing to war with God for this project. And they're willing to war with God to be on an equal sort of footing with him. And so to me, I know it's a very, very small detail, but the fact that you have this little point up top can suggest a lot of different things. But yeah, I think that's what I have for this card. the meat grinder thing. That's pretty much the main thing I wanted to get across. Super, super appropriate for Mars. And I don't know if we've seen it yet, but you can see in the upper right hand side of the card that that is the Hebrew letter Peh, which means mouth. And so again, communication, and you're going to see a large mouth in a very, very important version of this card. Right. So what we have here is referred to as the Tarot of the Third Millennium from the year 2000. And this deck is absolutely gorgeous. I had never heard of it until I was at a tarot symposium. And when I first saw it, I was really, really intrigued and impressed with the quality of art. All of the symbolism in it is fascinating. The silhouettes and the compositions are very intriguing as well. As an example, I absolutely love the fact that there is a pole front and center, basically, right in the middle of the card. And so this is, as I've been saying for a while now, this is symbolic of the world axis or the cosmic axis. And so when you're dealing with staffs, when you're dealing with scepters, you are also dealing with world axis symbolism. And so notice how close axis is to axle. This is why axis symbols bring order. They bring order and stability because it gives things to revolve around. The same way an axis gives the wheel that function. It actually has something to revolve around. The same way the pole star is in the middle of the heavens and the cosmos revolves around the pole star, right? And so to me, this is beautiful symbolism. The fact that there is a very large staff that runs from above to below, right in the middle of the card. I also love the detail of the fact that the tower is incomplete. So this is alluding to the Tower of Babel story, which was incomplete. It was never finished before the languages were introduced and everyone scattered about and they could not understand each other. And so God, to me, here, he's touching what would be the top of the tower, which would be kind of the apex or the crown of the tower, right? The head of the tower, the part of the tower that's closest to heaven, right? But it's not there. He's alluding to it. He's almost kind of, I wouldn't say he's mocking the people, but through the context of the Tower of Babel story, to me, he is highlighting the thing which the people wanted, but were not able to actually achieve. And so that to me is interesting. Also, I'm saying that it's the head, right, or the crown of the tower, and we've seen crown symbolism in other versions of the card. And to the right, what do you see? You see the head of God. And so the upper portion of the canvas is head symbolism, the head of the tower, which is invisible because it was never complete, and then literally the head of God, basically. And I like the fact, too, that there's different styles of towers moving upward, different styles of buildings. And so this speaks to me on so many different levels because I think the Tower of Babel story is like more universal in certain ways than I used to realize, I guess. It's a basic storyline that I've known about for, I don't know, like my whole life kind of, but I never really got into the details with it and like what it actually represented. And so when people build things that are tall, and I've said this before, but when people are building things that are tall, that stretch up to the sky, they're trying to build a bridge to the heavens. And I also think the same thing is going on with trees and plants that just shoot upward. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch my cosmic tree presentation that I have on my channel. I think a lot of plants are kind of emulating this same idea of stretching up to the heavens, creating a little bridge to the heavens. And I think there's storylines like Jack and the Beanstalk that really just talk about it overtly. It's like an overt part of their storyline. It's also an overt part of the Tower of Babel story. So anyway, beautiful, beautiful card. Once again, it's called Tarot of the Third Millennium, from the year 2000. Yeah, a lot more can be said about all of this, but we'll proceed to the next one, which is the Jodorowsky card. So Alejandro Jodorowsky, the famous filmmaker who made The Holy Mountain, um, and a bunch of other ones too. And I can't even believe the names are escaping me right now. I'm sure I'll think about it here in like 2 seconds. The other films that he's made, but I've seen a handful of them. Um, and so Jodorowsky is a huge tarot nerd, right? And what he did was he created a deck in 1998, which is like an updated, refined Marseille deck. And so he cleaned up the lines. He really focused a lot on, I guess, what you could call color theory, or like what colors should go where for what purpose. So as an example, you see the figure right there, on the right hand side. One leg is yellow, the other leg is blue. Jodorowsky would probably have a lot of things to say about that, or even like the little glyph on that green door there, or you see those two little blobs of yellow just beneath the tower. All of these things were like strategically done, and I appreciate what he did for sure, but I would say that personally, I'm not someone that's like diving into those details. I'm just more so interested in, I guess, other aspects of the symbolism. So, up until this point, this card is easily like inspired by the oldest decks around that you can get. You see a very basic, simple tower. It has three windows. You see all of these dots in the air as well, and they're multicolored. That's something else that we're going to see, I think in older decks more so specifically. Sometimes it's actually not dots, but it's little yods or yuds, which is a Hebrew letter, which means hand, but it also is like symbolic of fire. And when I see these dots, to me, what I get is kind of like static electricity, just like when lightning is about to strike. And so I think of static electricity. I think of there being a buzz in the air, or that the overall sort of vibration of the scene, it's changed. There's something happening in the air. There's a frequency sort of change. And so I just think the static electricity thing is probably what's being alluded to here. The other thing I will note is that the lightning strike that we've been accustomed to in some of the cards that we've checked out so far, you don't see lightning. It's very different. It kind of reminds me of filigree, right? It's very creative. It kind of, to me, what it's speaking to is the fact that we tend to associate creativity with creation, right? So creativity, to create, and creation. And so we tend to think, we acknowledge the artistry in creation, but we don't always acknowledge the artistry in destruction, which is another aspect of things. And so to me, I think that's maybe perhaps what it's alluding to, is the fact that destruction is also a very creative act. Um, and also just by the nature of what destruction and chaos looks like, it's very different from what, most people are kind of used to. You're seeing things strewn about. There's broken things, and things have disintegrated or dissolved or caught on fire. And so there's a beauty in destruction as well as creation. And so I think in part that's what this card represents, and I think perhaps maybe that's what the filigree sort of stylized quote unquote lightning bolt maybe represents. um, you're also seeing that strike is coming from what looks like the sun, or perhaps even Mars itself. I think some of these cards are maybe alluding to the fact that it's Mars that's delivering this strike. Maybe it's something else though. But those are the two things that come to mind for me: the sun or Mars itself. Also, look how squared off the top of the tower is. I know this deck is very simple, given the fact that The first time it was created, according to my research, was basically in like the early 1700s. And so, when you're looking at this artwork, you could argue that, oh, well, why is it so clean and squared off? Is it because of a lack of artistic skills and abilities? Or maybe is there something else kind of going on there? It makes me wonder if what's being alluded to is the fact that the tower was not complete in the Tower of Babel story. And maybe that's kind of what's going on here. I don't know. You have that crown, which we've talked about before. And then this door is interesting. The fact that the person inside, it's like half of his body is coming out of this door, and then the other half is still in the tower. Also, I'll say, look at the proportions of the people. The proportions of the people are completely nuts with this tower. So they're very, very large. Have they gotten too big for their britches? Is this symbolic maybe of their large egos, thinking that they can build a tower to the heavens? I don't know, but proportionally, there's something to be said about all of that. And the fact too that that little door there is green, it kind of looks like it almost looks like a crescent moon that's been rotated or something along those lines. I'm not sure, but I would love to know what you guys think. So we're going to see other examples of this card later on in the presentation, but this is the first sort of version that we're looking at because Jodorowski decided to use the Marseille deck as his inspiration for his deck. So this is an interesting one. This is the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic from 1995. And what you're seeing here is the tower. And in front of the tower is Shiva as the cosmic dancer. And so in this version, Shiva is known as the Lord of the Dance. And I think it's interesting that this would be the case. So this kind of speaks to what I was just talking about, in my opinion. The fact that creation is creative, but so is destruction. And that, there's something to be said about the drum of war or the drums of war. So when I think of dancing, I think of percussion instruments, I think of beats, and then I think of the drum of war. And so whether you're creating, there's a dance to creation, but there's also a dance to destruction as well. I think it's fascinating too that in most versions of Shiva as the Lord of the Dance, as the cosmic dancer here, generally they're seen on one foot. And one foot or one-legged symbolism is intimately tied to the world axis or cosmic axis. So this is why sometimes you see Mercury and he's balancing on one foot, because Mercury has a very, very strong relationship to the phallus and also to the cosmic axis. And one foot symbolism or one-legged symbolism implies balance in and of itself, obviously, but it also implies twirling or spinning. And so this is speaking to what I was saying earlier regarding the pole star being the cosmic axle and everything revolving around it. And so a really good example of this, by the way, is the Magician card from the Crowley deck, from the Thoth deck. And you'll see that the Magician is balancing on a tippy toe. Or you'll notice that the older Venus statues, where it's a big, voluptuous woman, it always tapers down. It tapers down, and their feet are they're touching each other, and they're balanced. They are she's balancing on her tippy toes, basically, which is also mirrored in the Justice card from the Thoth deck as well. There's also constellations in the northern sky that have been related to legs, specifically the thigh of the bull. So the thigh of the bull, according to the Egyptians, they had that in the northern sky. And what we have there in its place in the modern world is Ursa Major, which is the Great Bear, or the Big Dipper, basically. So there is a long tradition associating the world axis, cosmic axis, the northern sky with one-legged or one-foot symbolism. When I first came across this years ago, it was really difficult for me to wrap my head around this. But the further along I just continue to research and everything else and integrate this information, it makes way more sense. So here you have a tower symbolic of the world axis, and then you have this foot, this one-legged stance here. This is beautiful symbolism. This is absolutely perfect. And I know for a fact that this guy here, Lon Milo Duquette, the creator of this deck, once again, this deck is called the Tarot of Ceremonial Magic from 1995. He is aware of world axis symbolism. You have to dig for it, but he knows about some of this stuff. And that maybe perhaps is a topic, for another day. But that's why this card to me is just when you start decoding the layers of symbolism, it's very, very, very sound. And it goes back to this polar understanding, as in the pole star, basically, and this pole from the north to the northern sky. So just behind the tower, you also see a pyramid. The pyramid to me is symbolic of a central mountain. The central mountain is also a cosmic or world axis symbol. So you can look into Mount Meru as an example. And so I think all pyramids essentially are based off of the world mountain. And so I think it's also interesting that literally pyramid, I got into this in my Emperor card video, but pyramid literally has Ram right in the middle. Pyramid. And again, the tower card corresponds with Mars and Aries. And so in so many different ways, I would say, but mostly Mars, right? Also, you see that lightning flash coming from the upper right. It's very, very deliberate. Someone in a stream last night pointed this out, and I totally agree with them. Excuse me for not remembering who mentioned this, but the lightning flash, there's a Kabbalistic tree of life correspondence with that lightning flash, how it's shown. And so you see a lightning bolt going from Sephiroth to Sephiroth. It's creating a specific path. The Kabbalistic tree of life is all about path work. I'm actually doing a show next month where I'll be getting into this path work sort of idea, and specifically the tree of death, or the Klipothic tree of life, the inverted tree of life. But no doubt that lightning design right there is absolutely a reference to this lightning flash on the tree of life. Also, it's really interesting that the planet in the upper right, again, is it the sun? Is it supposed to be symbolically Mars? Is it something else? It almost kind of looks like an egg, so there's that as well. And you can see too some of the other correspondences down below. And I'm not sure exactly what some of those symbols represent. At some point, I feel like I need to do my research with all of that, because I'm always intrigued. It's like that tower on the right-hand side, right? It's like, is this a glyph that's been used, in some magical systems? Did he just make this up and included it there? What's going on there? Or even on the left-hand side, you have Ayin, and then you have the Y, and then you have the circle with the dash down below. It's like, I just want to know more about it. So maybe you have a resource for that. I'm not sure. But yeah, so that is, once again, Tarot of Ceremonial Magic from 1995. But before I move on, I just want to make sure I got everything. Yep, I think so. So next we have Tarot of the Ages from 1988. So this whole deck is Egyptian inspired or Egyptian themed, basically. And so to me, this looks like it could be a pyramid, part of a pyramid. It kind of looks like a ziggurat as well, which is like a stepped pyramid. And there's generally 7 layers to the ziggurat. So perhaps that is partly what's going on here. I'm not sure. You can see that this is one of the cards that corresponds with Capricorn. You've got 3 figures falling. Generally, I would say that the symbolism here is pretty simple. There are other versions that I think have more to chew on. And even in this deck, too, there's other cards that have a lot more information going on. But I would say that this one's pretty light. So moving on, we have Barbara Walker's Tower card, which here she calls the House of God. So this is from 1986. I love Barbara Walker. I think she has some excellent books. So if you're unfamiliar with her work and you're interested in symbolism, definitely check out her stuff. She comes from, a different perspective, I would say. And her deck for a while, this deck that you see right here, it was out of print for a long time. And I was really stoked to see that it became available again. And so for a good long while, her cards were hard to come by, or you were going to pay a premium for them. So, anyways, I'm happy to have her stuff around. So, it's interesting that the crown up top looks like a dome, and then you have a cross on top of that crown. And this reminds me a lot of the Globus Cruciger, which I got into in my Emperor card video. So the Globus Cruciger, generally, you'll see a Emperor, and he's throned, and he's holding this sphere in his hand. And on top of the sphere, you see that cross. And there's a few things that you can, look into with that and decode with that. It's also known as the Holy Hand Grenade. One of the things that I kind of talked about a few times was the idea that the Venus symbol, when flipped, sometimes that's actually used for the symbol for Mars. So the Martian symbol that most of us know about, it's a circle, right, with an arrow going to the upper right. But in my personal sort of studies and note taking and stuff, I tend to use the upside down Venus glyph. And most people know, women are from Venus, men are from Mars. And so the Globus Cruciger being affiliated with the Emperor, which is affiliated with Aries, which is ruled by Mars, and then here in a Martian card, you see it again, basically, I think is pretty interesting. And so you have the classic tower being blasted with lightning, and you have these two figures falling down. And actually, it's really funny because I'm just noticing this for the first time. But the figure on the left is the Emperor from her Emperor card. That's kind of one of the cool things I like about her deck, actually. There are several cards that are related, and she's putting the same figure in the cards, or she's alluding to the same symbolism somehow, and I'm just picking up on this now. That's really fun. So that figure on the left is the Emperor himself, being humbled, having a fall from grace moment. So I love that detail. That's really cool. So is that then on the right the Empress? I don't know. I can't remember exactly what her Empress card looks like. But it makes me wonder if she's wearing yellow, because that would be pretty cool and pretty interesting, having the Emperor and the Empress falling from this tower. The other little detail that I like here that does show up in a few other cards is this path that is leading to the front of the tower. And so, just implies that there is, a journey. It took time and it took effort to get to the tower itself. There's no background to speak of. That's another thing I like about her deck, is how simple it is. She doesn't clutter it with a lot of things. So it's like a very straightforward take. A lot of her cards are, but it's very black back there, right? And so it implies that this happened at night as well. But the fact that it's just kind of the tower was built, where it was built, it kind of looks like, maybe the rest of the terrain is much further down. So not only are they falling from the tower, but the fall is going to be that much greater because you can't even see the ground. And so perhaps this is, somewhere on top of a mountain or something like that. But their fall is very great here, or at least that's what's implied. But otherwise, everything else is pretty straightforward in my opinion. So this is the Morgan Greer deck from 1979. I love the Morgan Greer. I say it every single time I talk about it, but it's like one of my favorite decks. I love how solid and high quality the illustrations are. Everything looks very thick, and everything looks like, I don't know, like there's this chunky sort of thing with everything, with this whole entire deck. And so the tower is kind of no different. I like how powerful the tower looks. You see two lightning strikes, obviously coming from the sides there up top, and then you see these two figures falling. I think it's an intriguing sort of way to depict the figures too, just leaving them be silhouettes, not giving them too much detail. And then kind of interesting too, you see these waves down below, so as above, so below, they're falling and they're going to fall into the ocean. And it looks like obviously it's kind of turbulent down there. So that's fascinating. The fact that lightning would strike, there's this heat or fiery quality to the card, and yet they're going to fall down to water, which obviously water is its own destructive force, right? But otherwise, pretty much everything is fairly straightforward here. But I still love it nonetheless. Well, here's one where you can get into a lot of interesting little details. So this is the Hermetic Tarot from 1979. And this deck is all over the place for me. There are certain cards that I absolutely love, others not so much. But there's still a lot to appreciate. So I'm sure most of you guys who are really into tarot are probably familiar with this one. Here, it's not called the Tower, but it's called the Blasted Tower, right? And also, I like the fact that you have the Mars glyph pointing straight up instead of actually being pointed to the upper right. So you see that in the upper left hand portion of the card. And also, too, it makes sense to point out that we're dealing with a lot of arrows here, right? So the Mars glyph itself is well known for having an arrow, at least the common one. And then we see a lot of these lightning bolts with arrows, or we will see more lightning bolts with arrows. But here's one example of that. And, again, what planet is this? Is this simply the sun and it's showing the rays of the sun there? Or perhaps is it Mars? Or is it something else? You got the watery sort of thing going on here as well. So he is falling into the ocean or a body of water. And the thing that I think is pretty intriguing, if you look on the side of the screen on the right where it's blown up, you're going to see two Kabbalistic trees of life with their 10 Sephiroth. But what you have here on the left is the Sephiroth, it's shaded and it's darker. And then on the right, it's lighter, right? And it's just outlined. And so to me, this is a reference to the two traditions with the tree of life, the Klipothic tree, which is the inverted tree, and then also just the normal tree of life, which is upright. So he's not showing either of them upside down, but I think that's what he's talking about. And I'm intrigued with this right now because, like I said, I'm going to be talking about some of these things next month on an upcoming podcast where we're going to get into the tunnels of Set and some of Kenneth Grant's work around that. So anyway, two trees of life, one, or what I would say the tree of death and a tree of life being shown here. And to me, what this is speaking to is just kind of the idea of Mars with as much energy as Mars contains, as much as we associate it with war or aggression or violence, sovereignty, independence, all of that, that this same energy gives as much life as it takes. And so that is like the beautiful sort of perspective that I have over Mars these days is, yeah, most people are going to call it the planet of war or the god of war, but it's necessary. This energy is necessary, which is why it kicks off the astrological year. And I was just reading recently in one of my resources the fact that some people have referred to the astrological new year as the Martian New Year. And so the fact that we start spring off with a sign that is governed or ruled by Mars kind of tells you everything you need to know. So, yes, there's a sacrificial element, there's an aggressive element, there's a masculine sort of thing, there's a phallic sort of thing. But also, this is what's required for spring to come and thrive and for the plants to come back and bloom. So this is the energy that's needed or required to kickstart the new year and transition out of winter. And so the Martian energy, sometimes I think that people maybe undersell it or it's kind of looked at in a negative light, and maybe that's just me projecting, I don't know. But I'm just starting to see kind of both sides of the coin now with Mars and with chaos and with destruction, as above, so below sort of thing. So it's like if we like when things are being created, we like it when things are blooming and, the sun has returned. We like nice weather and we like it when, Mother Nature is basically singing. We then have to acknowledge the fact that fall exists for a very good reason. Winter exists for a very good reason. That we need nature to recede. We need the destructive aspect in order for life to actually thrive. The idea behind sacrifice too is that everything requires something else to feed on. And so whether, you're a vegetarian or you're carnivorous or whatever, it's just kind of the fact of the matter is you need something to sustain. You need something in order to survive. So, personally, that's kind of, I just see this trade-off where in order for me to do well, I need to consume, certain types of food, and that food has to come from something or somewhere. It's not just going to, miraculously just exist and be eaten without some sort of, I guess, some sort of exchange of energy, basically. That energy needs to be exchanged, and sometimes that energy exchange is for creation, and sometimes that energy exchange is for destruction. And so, again, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So, this energy, as chaotic as this scene might be, as seemingly uncomfortable as this card might be for certain people, it's part of life. That's just what happens. So I think perhaps one of the simplest ways of saying it is that what goes up must come down as well. That is one of the key themes with this card. You'll also notice down below that one of the alternative hermetic titles for this card, which, by the way, this is one of the reasons why I love this deck, is because it just puts it out there, right there for you. Lord of the Hosts of the Mighty. So that is the alternative name for this card, which there are several, but I find them to be very, very helpful. So Lord of the Hosts of the Mighty. Right. So moving on, we have what's referred to as the Marty Jaeger deck, or what I've heard be said about this deck is that sometimes it's called the Naked Jaeger. And you can guess why, right? If I'm not mistaken, maybe all of the figures in this deck are naked. And so I just think I don't know. When I first came across this deck, I was like blown away with certain cards. And then as I really got used to it and started studying it and things like that, it just kind of cracks me up, the fact that it's sometimes dubbed the Naked Jaeger deck. But for good reason, right? And so there are a few unique things going on here. First off, you see that crown on the left-hand side of the card. It's falling down to earth. Presumably, actually, I feel like it's interpretive. Was that crown on top of that figure's head who is flying upward? There's two things going on. There's an as above, so below thing going on. So you have one figure flying up to the heavens, and then you've got another figure that's being blasted out of that tower, falling to earth. And so you have this kind of equal exchange thing going on. One thing is rising, another thing is falling. One figure is rising and the other one is descending. So an ascension and a descension is kind of going on here in this artwork. And so what it what I'm starting to think now is that that crown on the left hand side probably was on the figure ascending, and then you see the top of the tower being blasted off with the figure up top, with the tower up top on top of that mountain. And so you have two crowns that are actually midair, which is fascinating. And one is kind of it's being blown off in both ways, but one is associated with the falling figure, the other one is associated with the rising figure. Um, and then also the other thing too that I think is intriguing is the fact that there's a bridge between one part of the mountain and then the main part of the mountain where that tower is. Because bridge symbolism is definitely appropriate with this card, mainly because of the communication element with the Tower of Babel and the fact that their bridge was severed because they were a unified front and they could understand each other, and then it ceased to be because they all were given a new language. And so that is what halted their progress with building the Tower of Babel. And this is where, too, we get literally like babbling on and to babble on, right? And so communication is obviously a bridge between people and a bridge between civilizations and everything else. And once again, just to reiterate, but that's what the tower represents. It represents, a connection to the heavens. And so this is partly what the world axis represents, is that it's both a connection and a separation between the above and the below. And so if you want to learn more about that, I have other presentations, but that's what I'm seeing with this card. Very, very interesting. The fact that he's flying too. I don't know. I can't kind of get over that fact, but very fascinating. And then also, I can't really see it in this preview here, but it appears as though there's some sort of design perhaps etched into that stone down below. It kind of looks like Thor's hammer or something like that. I don't think that's what it is, but it kind of looks like a screw or something. I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to take a closer look. And actually, maybe I'm gonna do that right now because I don't know if I've noticed that before. Oh yeah, the lighting here is not good enough for me to discern what that is. But there you have it, the Marty Yeager deck from 1975. And here we have the Thoth deck from 1943, right? Here you have the most overt eye symbolism so far. And you have, this looks very chaotic. It looks very confusing. So once again, the Tower of Confusion. So even the figures, they're very confusing. They're all like, they almost look like polygon figures or something like that. And so it's very abstract, and this deck is very abstract, but the amount of energy that's completely packed into this canvas to me is like incredible. So one thing I wanted to point out for sure is that once again, eye symbolism, just like what we saw early on, you saw the eye above the tower. I think you can make the case that the eye is symbolic of Polaris, the pole star, and someone in one of the chats in a presentation I was giving mentioned Polaris as in pole iris, and that could potentially be a connection, that the pole star literally is a reference to the iris, the eye of God, right? But the thing I want to mention is that all shapes that look like yonis, which includes the eye, which is like an almond shape, right? It both projects and receives information. We generally think of the eye as receiving light, but my very strong hunch and understanding is that it actually projects light as well. And so it's a two-way street. So all yoni shapes are two ways, that there's both an inner and an outer sort of thing going on. It's two-way traffic. And so is this eye in part destroying the tower? I don't know. It kind of looks like the wrath of God, if you will. But you also have this mouth down below that is clearly spewing fire and also destroying the tower. So it kind of looks to me like there's an as above, so below destructive force going on here with that mouth and with that eye. And so I just have to reiterate, but the Hebrew letter that corresponds with this card is Peh, which means mouth, right? Which is, an important sort of element with the Tower of Babel story. You also have a dove on the left hand side, like a dove of peace. And then on the right hand side, you have, basically what amounts to a demiurgic sort of figure. So the head of a lion and then the body of a serpent or a worm. So sometimes I just think it's interesting to point that out, that sometimes the demiurge has the head of a lion and the body of a serpent, but I think originally a lot of the older original illustrations, which this looks like it's based off of that, it's actually the body of a worm, which is pretty interesting. And so a lot of people equate the God of the Bible to being the demiurge. And the demiurgic storyline is that he thinks he's the supreme deity, but he doesn't realize that there's a God above God, which is Sophia, which is the feminine force or feminine energy. And maybe that's what's being alluded to here, is the fact that the eye and that dove there, at least in terms of the hierarchy of this illustration, that they're both above this demiurgic icon on the right hand side. So maybe that's what's being alluded to. I'm not really sure. But the fact that these figures too are like kind of faceless, and I think that kind of implies that it can be anybody. And so it can be anybody. It can be you. This is you. This is your fall from grace, basically. And I think that there is, so many ways to decode all of the mythologies of the world, right? I've gone over this before, but there's like a mystical component, a psychological component, a sociological aspect. And, so these myths are multifaceted, right? There's four main functions to mythology. And, I think that there is a personal sort of way of looking at this storyline too, which I know PK in the chat from last night was bringing that up, and I totally agree. There's a microcosmic aspect to all the cards, and there's a macrocosmic aspect to all of the cards as well. So, think about your own personal story and how you've maybe perhaps wanted to ascend, or maybe you tried to do things before it was the right time. Maybe you got too big for your own britches. Maybe your ego got too big and you thought you were this, that, or the other thing, when in actuality you weren't, and you maybe perhaps got humbled or something along these lines. Symbolically, I love the Icarus storyline, but did you fly too close to the sun, basically? And so I think that that's partly, obviously what's going on here. But because the figures are abstract, I really think that you can kind of interpret yourself as being one of these characters. Also, to notice that the gate on the tower is open, which I think is an interesting detail. It could be closed, but here it is open. It's open, yet they are falling from the top of it, so they're not escaping via via the door down below. They're escaping against their will. They're not even really escaping, actually. They're just they're being projected off. They're being thrown off of this tower. So so there you have it. Very, very interesting card. A lot more to say about it that maybe we'll get into another time, but we still have plenty of other cards to go. So to move on, we have the Rider Waite from 1909. And so we've gone through most of the symbolism now, I would say. So there's little left to be unpacked here, in my opinion, that we haven't kind of covered already. But I will say, though, that this is one of the examples where instead of the atmospheric sort of energy, the static electricity, little spheres all over the place, what you have here are little yod symbols or yud symbols. And so yod or yud, the idea is that this is like the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And so it really, it's considered to be kind of like the spark that created the rest of the letters. So it's a small packet of energy. And so whenever you see a little yud, which kind of looks like a little flame or something, that's what you're seeing. That's what you're seeing within within that little glyph there, within that little shape, is just fire or energy. Also potential as well, I would say. Right. So moving on, now we're getting into some of the older decks. So this is the Soprafino deck from 1835. There are some straightforward sort of things going on here. I do love a few of the smaller details, though. So, as an example, the first thing I'm picking up on right now is the fact that there are three figures, and they're all doing very different things. And so, one of the figures down below has already fallen, and it looks as though there's some concrete or stone or bricks or whatever on his leg. And then you have another figure that's actively falling. And then, if you can see it, there's another figure that's actually, in that top window in the tower. So you have three different situations going on: someone who has fallen already, someone who is falling, and someone who is actually still in the tower itself. So I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, it kind of reminds me of the, like the cardinal signs, the fixed signs, and the mutable signs. Um, a lot of times in the Wheel of Fortune card, you're going to see three different figures. One is going up the wheel, one is balancing on top of the wheel, and then another is actually going down the wheel. And so it's like three different modalities being shown here. Also, you'll notice that crest down below, it's showing a serpent eating a man on it, which is the Alfa Romeo logo as well. And I know there's some royal ties to that insignia, but I think that was worth pointing out. It's also on a shield. And so shield symbolism you'll see associated with Mars as well, and the Emperor card. It's not uncommon to see a shield on the Emperor card. Obviously, shields imply, going to war, basically. And also, you see that there's what looks like to me a cannon at the very top of that tower. And so I'm just reminded of the little storyline with my research with the Tower of Babel. The fact that they believed that they were going to war with God, that they had the arrogance to think that they can build this tower up to the heavens and then literally have a war with God. And I think that's like a really, really intriguing detail. But I wonder if that's why there's that cannon up there. I don't know. And instead of actually having a crown being blown off, you're just seeing the very top, kind of like the symbolic crown of the tower being blown off. So that's cool as well. So yeah, there you have it. The Sopra Fino from 1835. Now we have the 1 JJ Tarot from 1831. And so the thing that I noticed today while looking at this card is the lightning strike and how it looks like it is coming from the sun there. But it's one of the more tame lightning strikes that we have seen. Even just look at the tip of the lightning bolt, the arrow. It's not too big, and yet it is still bringing this tower down, obviously. So to me, that's kind of fascinating that would be the case. Instead of it being a grander, larger lightning bolt or lightning flash, you see that it's pretty thin. And then also that sun there, I just feel like there's something to be said about all this. Is it implying some sort of solar flare thing? The fact that a lot of these cards, the lightning bolt is coming from the upper right, and then you have that sphere, that luminary, whatever it might be, that star in the upper right. Very, very intriguing. You can see here that these figures, at least, their colors are kind of mixed matched. So one is wearing a blue top, another one is wearing a red top. One has already fallen, the other one is in the act of falling. But otherwise, pretty straightforward. The other thing I'll say regarding brick symbolism is there's an intriguing relationship with the Gemini twins and bricks, basically. And there's an intriguing rabbit hole with brick symbolism and Freemasonry and masonry, right? And so my understanding is that the Babylonians started baking bricks out when the sun was like in full force during Gemini season. And so they halted building projects and they halted brick baking until the sun was out. And so this was during Gemini season, and they referred to Gemini season as the brick mold. And the Gemini twins, the hero twins of Rome, Romulus and Remus, they're credited for building the first brick wall in Rome. And one part of their storyline is that Mars is actually the father of the Gemini twins. And so there's that correspondence, which is interesting. But bricks, in and of themselves, there's a lot of potential with bricks. They're building blocks, right? And so you can create these grand structures with bricks, yet look at their destructive force, as well. So bricks can be used for building, but bricks can also be used to destroy. And it's there were protests a handful of years ago where brick pallets started showing up everywhere, and that was used for destructive purposes. Obviously, you think of you throw a brick through a window, right? And so bricks being building blocks, but they can also be sort of used for destroying things as well. And those protests, by the way, happened during Gemini season. And so there was actually a lot of Gemini symbolism baked into that whole entire storyline, which maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll get into at some point. I kind of feel like perhaps it could be a little too controversial. I don't know. But yeah, I might get into that, because when it was going on, I saw Gemini symbolism all over the place. And then when I started seeing the brick pallets being placed all over the country for these protests, I could not believe it. I'm like, this is a brick mold ritual. And then I'm just going to say, but I'm looking at these two figures here too. I am reminded of the Gemini twins as well. And generally, right, one twin is good, the other twin is evil, something along those lines. Also too, it's a small sort of thing, but there is an arch over that doorway there, and that arch is emphasizing the keystone. And so keystone symbolism is really fascinating. I have a video under my Cancer playlist that gets into some of that symbolism. But the fact that it's there when it's not really necessary, it's just it's intriguing. So, and then the two pillars, right? So here I was talking about Gemini symbolism, and then you've got those two golden pillars flanking that door, on the sides of that door. So whenever you see two pillars, think of Gemini symbolism. And there's twin pillar symbolism all over the Jewish world, and a bunch of other places as well. But there's always an implied third pillar or middle way or gateway whenever you see those two pillars. So this isn't the presentation to get into that, but as I'm seeing it, I figured I would point that out. This one's really, really basic, but this is the Neoclassico from 1810. And, it is showing a complete tower. So this is before the destructive force, before it was brought down. So I just think that's an interesting take, to not necessarily see a tower being destroyed, but to see just a tower in general. So again, all of the symbolism that I've been pointing out regarding the tower, the phallic nature of it, the world axis stuff, obviously still there. I think it's interesting that they are emphasizing like the four quadrants on that door. So 4 very much relating to stability and foundations and things like that. I wonder how deliberate that was. And then also too, it's just a simple, clean illustration. There's no background, nothing going on that I feel like is really worth unpacking too much. You see up top, the design, it kind of looks like it's arrows just pointing upward. It reminds me of the glyph, the rune for Tyr, Tyr, which is where we actually get Tuesday from, which Tuesday is the day of Mars. So in my last video about the emperor, or no, it was about Mars. So my Mars presentation, I get into that a little bit. So that's kind of a curious detail, those upward arrows. And again, arrow symbolism. So arrow symbolism and Mars, they kind of go hand in hand. It goes hand in hand with fire. So even just think of the Sagittarius glyph being an arrow being pointed to the upper right, not unlike the traditional Mars glyph. And then also under the traditional planetary sort of system, the classic system of seven planets, Mars rules Scorpio, and the Scorpio glyph is an M with an arrow right on the bottom right hand leg of that M. So again, some subliminal arrows here. I wonder if that was deliberate or just kind of a coincidence. I don't know, but this card was made a while back, so 1810. Anyway, just a few thoughts to chew on. Food for thought. And this is a Marseille version of the card. This is from 1709. Once again, I already mentioned it because we reviewed the Jodorowski version of this card, but the filigree sort of lines in the upper right, it reminds me of a creative, destructive act. And then also those spheres, just or dots, those colorful dots all over the place, just reminds me of static electricity or a buzz in the air. So, also, yeah, there's a few details too that I'm noticing for the first time. As an example, just below the tower, you guys remember the little yellow blotches or yellow blobs from the Jodorowsky deck? You see them here actually, and so they're not colored in as just yellow. The whole bottom portion is yellow, but they are there. So what is that implying? I don't know. That's a good one. I'm gonna have to think about that. But otherwise, very similar sort of setup from the other version that we saw. Maybe that figure though, he's not coming out of a door. So that's interesting. Is he behind the tower? Is the door on the side of the tower? And notice that both of their hands are touching the ground as well. And it almost looks like they're looking for something on the ground, like they're contact lenses or something. It looks like they're searching. Interesting. I never really picked up on that detail, but that must mean something. I just don't know what it is. Layers upon layers of symbolism here, even as simple as it is, right? And so this deck, its name, it never rolls off the tongue, but it is Engravings Sec 18th century. Literally, if you're going to Google it, that is what it's called. Engraving Sec 18th century, Roman numeral 18. Here you see another complete tower. It's funny that you're seeing also these little spheres again, so again, there's an energy in the air. I don't think this is rain. I don't think it's snow. I don't think it's hail. It must be implying some sort of etheric energy or something along these lines, I would say. Just above the tower, you have the clouds, and then you see rays shining upon the tower. It does look like on the top of the tower, that window at least, that there is a damsel there, perhaps a maiden, perhaps, Virgo energy, a young woman, and then down below, she's being guarded by 4 guards. And so whenever I see 4 figures, I always think of the 4 elements: air, water, fire, earth. And then if you see a 5th figure in like a prominent position or like an important position, oftentimes that 5th figure represents spirit or ether. So it's actually the 5 elements. So you will see, like with Abraxas as an example, Abraxas is being pulled by 4 horses. Each of these horses, in my opinion, represents the 4 elements, but then Abraxas himself represents the 5th element. There's a lot of other examples of this, but if a charioteer is being pulled by 4 horses, those 4 horses are the 4 elements, and then the charioteer himself is the 5th element, is actually spirit or ether. And so I think that's kind of what's going on here, is that the 4 figures represent the 4 elements. They're more terrestrial. We're in contact with fire and water and earth and air every single day. But then there's this 5th sort of ascended, more tranquil, etheric sort of energy, which would be that woman. And then also, it kind of just looks like to me like she's obviously inside the tower, but right around her it's dark. So she is. I think they're implying kind of like womb symbolism. It kind of reminds me of some hermit symbolism, being in a cave as well. And the hermit card corresponds with Virgo. So I think the case could be made that there she represents kind of a Virgo, Queen of Heaven sort of energy, which is really, really beautiful symbolism too, because as I've been saying, the tower represents a phallic energy. You know, it's just like an erect penis, basically. And so it's the world axis, which is you're dealing with polar symbolism, as in the pole. And so within this phallic object, you have the feminine. And this is another thing I've been saying for like a while now. But when you look into masculine symbolism, oftentimes you're going to find the feminine. When you look into feminine symbolism, oftentimes you're going to find the masculine. And so they actually play off of each other that way, that you need the other half to explain the energy that you're trying to explain. So it makes sense that there's a lot of words or there's a lot of symbolism in very masculine cards that's feminine, and vice versa, basically. So as an example, Mars, M-A-R, right? It's the planet of war, it's phallic, it's aggressive, all this stuff. Yet Mary, the Virgin Mary, Mari, you know, her name starts with M-A-R, right? Or marine or maritime, you know, this is has to do with the ocean. Or mare, there's a lot of things that are kind of feminine, more watery in nature, that basically originates or at least has a correspondence with the word Mars, or MAR at least. And so kind of like what I was saying earlier regarding the strength card as well, is you kind of need there's lots of little inversions kind of going on when you're really getting into astrological or tarot symbolism. So yeah, so that's kind of what I have here. Very interesting, actually. This one is speaking to me more than when I reviewed it earlier. Also, there's a storyline with the Tower of Babel narrative where the people building the tower would occasionally throw spears into the heavens, towards the heavens, or they would shoot arrows towards the heavens, and that these spears and arrows would return with blood on it, which I think is interesting. And I forgot about that little detail, but looking at these guys down below with their spears, it just reminds me of that. And also the spear literally being symbolic of the world or cosmic axis as well, which I've gone into before. Right. So forgive me if I'm butchering this. Tarot de Jacques Viville from 1650. This is more of a recent pickup for me. Obviously, it's a reproduction of an old card, but as I've been saying, the tower, the obelisk, the pole, the staff, the scepter, it's all world axis symbolism. And perhaps the greatest symbol of the world axis is the world tree, or the tree itself. And here we have an awesome, you know, interpretation of that symbolism. It's not showing a tree, sorry, it's not showing a tower, but it's showing a tree. I think this is great personally. This like speaks to everything that I've been talking about for a good long while now. The symbolism matches up. It's a crude card. A lot of the figures are like, I mean, look at their left hand. What is going on there? And look at its neck. You know, it's a very crude deck, but when I flipped through it, I was like, I have to have this deck. And I'm pretty sure this is one of the cards that sent me over the edge because I'm such a nerd for this stuff. I'm like, there you go. And also the fact that this is from 1650, I think is fascinating. And so notice also too, there are animals down below. According to sort of my eye, I see goats down there, which is really interesting and makes a lot of sense. Goats are very, very earthy. Goats relate to, you know, the devil card and the devil himself. It's not uncommon for the adversary to have like goat horns or goat head. Baphomet has a goat head. And so also the goat, like the goat of Mendes, you know, that symbol, it's a pentagram pointing downward, right? And so that draws energy downward. the glyph, the alchemical glyph for Earth is a downward pointing triangle. And so everything regarding the goat, although goats are excellent climbers, but everything regarding the goat has to do with this lower sort of earthy kind of energy. And so to me, it's implying that the people of Earth, right, earthy energy, want to ascend or want to aspire to commune with the heavens or God. And so they want to go up a world axis symbol, whether it's a tree or a tower or whatnot. And they want to be one with the heavens. You know, they think the people down below always think that they deserve or are worthy of communing with a higher power, basically, and of ascension. And so here you have this figure too. It's, to me, it's kind of implying this because he is looking upward, and so he wants, you know, to be with the divine, and so he wants to bridge the gap between the above and the below. Also, and this is, you know, I say this, I've said this like multiple times tonight, but there's a really, really interesting history with goat symbolism and the Bach saga, and also this idea of a world tree or a tree at the Garden of Eden, the tree being symbolic of like a sacred center sort of thing. And so the goat symbolism in the Bach saga, I think, is pretty fascinating. And if I ever do a show on it, we'll have to get into that. Although there are people out there who know way more about that than myself. So the goat, all I'm trying to say is that the goat could have multiple meanings here. But suffice it to say, yeah, this is an appropriate substitute for the tower. It makes perfect sense to me. So this is the Montaigne tarot from the 15th century. So we only got a few cards left here, and they're all from the 15th century. And they all, you know, they're kind of hard. Once you get to decks this old, I don't even know if it's verifiable which one was the oldest, which one perhaps was influenced by the other. Did one of these decks come out like 20, 30, 40, 50 years before the others? I have no idea. I don't know if that's even something that you can find out. So, just very generically, the final decks here are just labeled as 15th century decks. And this deck itself does not have a clear tower card correspondence, but this is actually the strength card. And I just wanted to point out that this isn't the tarot card, as they, you know, basically they don't have a tarot card that is a literal representation of that. But I think that this one might be the closest sort of representation of the same energy, because you're dealing with a broken pillar. And so I've talked about pillar symbolism before in other live streams, especially during Leo season, which is right next to Virgo. And so it's not uncommon to see a young maiden or someone symbolic of Virgo with a broken pillar. And so to me, it's like, what's the difference between a broken pillar and a blasted tower? I think very little, personally. I think that, you know, I tend to see the similarities in things, but I think that you can make the case that symbolically they're pretty close to each other. And so you have this broken pillar, and obviously the tower, all in the Babel story, Tower of Babel story, wasn't necessarily complete. In these cards, the tower is complete, and then it's struck down, right? And here, this pillar was complete, and now it's broken. I just want to point out that when you get into the I Ching and you're dealing with the hexagrams and trigrams and yin and yang, which builds the trigrams and builds the hexagrams, you're dealing with a feminine energy and a masculine energy. So the yin and the yang. The yang is a complete line, and the yin is a broken line. So the complete line is more phallic, and the broken line, the yin, is more passive and receptive. And so I think it's kind of speaking to this energy that broken towers, broken pillars, the broken line, it more so corresponds with a chaotic sort of energy. And there's a lot to be said about the relationship between chaos and the divine feminine, and that chaos is more of a feminine sort of energy, and order, the complete line, the complete pillar, the complete tower, that phallic energy, is more so related to order. So order ab ko, order out of chaos, basically. And so to me, chaos can also be a reference literally to spirit or ether itself, hence order ab ko, order coming out of the chaos. If you want to learn more about this, I have a video. I did a presentation called Decoding Chaos, and it gets into some of this symbolism. And I think it'll make a lot more sense if you check that out. But an intriguing detail, just because we're here, is the fact that this is clearly a card that corresponds with Leo. And so you see the woman wearing a leonine lion breastplate. And then she's also wearing what looks like a mask that is lion inspired. And then you can see that weeping lion down in the lower left, which Leo is opposite Aquarius, opposite the water bearer. And on top of the pillar, you have that water vase, that jug, that urn of Aquarius. So to me, that's very deliberate. The fact that you would see an urn or vase on top of this pillar, and we're dealing with Leo, which is opposite Aquarius. And that was something that I've noticed in several versions of this illustration. There's a number of versions where you're seeing a woman with a broken pillar, and literally there's a vase on top of it, which is just speaking to the polarity of Leo, which is Aquarius, the water bearer. Right. So this is the Visconti Sforza from the 15th century as well. And so take it in for a second while I drink some water here. Pretty straightforward here. You see another shield on the tower. You don't see a crown. There's nothing too crazy going on here. But if my memory is correct, and I could be mistaken, my understanding is that the Visconti Forza deck, there was only one deck in existence in the modern world from which the rest of the deck was produced from. Reproductions of the deck were produced from. But there were two or three cards that were missing. And my understanding is that the Tower card may very well be one of those cards. So while I have it here that it's from the 15th century, the deck is from the 15th century, but this actually might be more modern artwork that's trying to emulate artwork from the 15th century because there were cards missing. And so I believe it is the Tower card that is missing. And I also believe that it's the Devil card that was missing. And so to me, that's fascinating too. People have said, like, why of all the cards, why is the Devil card missing? And people have kind of speculated that perhaps at some point the owner of the deck, either removed the Devil card out of fear, or maybe they were actually using it for black magical purposes, for ritualistic purposes. I don't really know. But if anyone can verify that in the comments, I would love to know if my information is correct. I talked to a hardcore tarot guy. Shout out to Tarot Garden. I believe that is their business name, either Tarot Garden or Tarot Gardens. I've purchased several decks from them, and we were talking about the Visconti Forza, I believe, and I think that he is the one who kind of turned me on to that information. So anyway, I wonder if that's the case, because when you compare this card to other cards in the deck, it really has a little bit of a different quality. And so to me, I think that my hunch is right, that this is actually one of those cards. But either way, like I said, fairly straightforward. I don't know if there's anything new that we can uncover here that we haven't already talked about. And finally, we have the Solabusca deck, which is from the 15th century. And kind of like the Mantegna deck, this is the one that I believe might be the closest correspondence to the Tower card. And so this deck is fascinating for a bunch of different reasons. But here you see the broken pillar. And so it just makes me wonder if instead of a broken tower or blasted tower, if some of these older decks didn't just have broken pillars. To me, that would make a lot of sense. The other thing that makes me think that this is actually the tower card is the fact that there's a broken crown down below. And so you can probably see it there to the left of that helmet. So there's a helmet and a broken crown. And so is that kind of like the genesis for a lot of newer tower cards? Because now that we're at the end of the line here with some of these older cards, these cards are what influenced all of the other decks to come, right? And so instead of a lightning bolt, it looks almost kind of like, I don't know if this is supposed to be a pillar of fire. I don't know if this is supposed to be a comet, right? Some comets, they're referred to as beards. They have this long trail behind them. So that would not surprise me at all. One of the things with this deck is that every single figure corresponds with an actual historical figure. And so this figure, whoever they are, uh, Nenerato, uh, Nina Roto, maybe. Um, and so I have a book. It's called The Game of Saturn. I might have to look into it, see what their storyline is. Is there anything related to the Tower of Babel story, Tower of Babel? I'm not sure. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that this is the 20th card in their major arcana. And the 20th card nowadays is either the Aeon card or the Judgment card. And there's absolutely this as above, so below sort of thing going on with that card. So, kind of like a guardian angel coming from the heavens, blasting a horn, and then people rising from the dead from their tombs and crypts and everything. And so, with all of the tower cards, I get this as above, so below thing. Man kind of aspiring to go upward, and then the wrath of God coming downward. So yeah, so there you have it, guys. That is what I got. I'm going to switch things up here. One moment. Okay. Here I am once again, guys. How's it going? Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Let me just quickly look over my notes with the Tower of Babel. I kind of, on a different stream, I started talking about it, and I can't remember what I maybe brought up last night, what I have forgotten to bring up today. So I'm just going to refer to my notes from yesterday and see if I missed anything that's important or crucial. And then after that, I'm going to check the chat for a few and see what's going on, see if anyone has left any super chats or have questions or whatever. And if you did leave one and you submitted it earlier on, please let me know that you did so I can go back and see what's good. Right. So the Tower card, very phallic. I mentioned that a few times. Tower of God, creation, destruction. Pe, meaning speech. Speech also creates and destroys, right? We all know what that's all about, right? But Pe, associating with the mouth and stuff. So when you get into esoteric Hebrew symbolism, it's like, you look up Pe, you're going to find a lot of stuff having to do with communication, speech, everything else. The mouth of God. The idea that, when you're looking at these tower cards, you're seeing like an active sort of destruction, right? And so you're seeing the tower currently being destroyed. And so to me, there's like this instantaneous sort of thing going on. And I think that Mars energy, that kind of fiery, sort of aggressive energy, speaks to, something happening right now. Not necessarily happening in the future, not necessarily happening in the past, but happening right now. Like if you're in a fight, you have to be very present. When you're speaking, this is one of the things I picked up while researching Pe. But speaking is very much an in the moment sort of thing. So you have to be aware, you have to be alert, you have to be cognizant. And not all mediums are like that. You can write, and the example I used last night was that you can write a letter to somebody and you can refine a paragraph or a sentence over and over and over and over. Right now, I'm speaking to you guys, so I have to be alert and present. Otherwise, I can fumble my words, I can forget my point, things like that. So the act of speaking itself is kind of a something that you have to be very present for, basically. And so I've kind of noticed that symbolism with Mars, and then also the fact that the tower, you're constantly, with all these examples, most of the time you're seeing it literally being destroyed, and literally you're seeing rubble come to the ground. And so there's something to be said about all of that. Right. So I think I pretty much mentioned everything that I wanted to talk about. The amount of work, obviously, that it would take to build these towers, I think is intriguing. And the three of discs corresponds with Mars and Capricorn. And so it's known as works. And so just the collective effort, again, that it takes to build these towers, I wanted to mention once again. And I honestly, guys, I think that's going to do it. But maybe one last thread that I've been thinking about has to do with the fact that there are more there is a modern version of the Tower of Babel story, I think. And I think it might have to do with the space race and rockets and things like that. So with all the stories that I talked about, or the Tower of Babel story, building something that ascends to the heavens, that kind of reminds me of rocketry. It kind of reminds me of a rocket, ascending to the heavens, basically. So, with modern rocketry, whatever you might think about these programs, is there something symbolically encoded within all of this? Also, it just reminds me of the fact that in the 60s, we were supposed to rally together as a country and a nation, not unlike the Babylonians, to build this tower. And we were all supposed to rally together behind this collective effort to send a rocket to the moon. It just kind of makes me think, are rockets kind of in a way mirroring this Tower of Babel sort of storyline, wanting to commune with the heavens symbolically? I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I think that that's something I can riff off of and make a presentation about. Because also too, I'm just going to say it because it's on my mind, and here I am, and here you guys are. But Jack Parsons, he was an occultist, but he was also very, very pivotal in the creation of what is now known as NASA. And his whole entire thing was Babylonian, so he was into Crowleyan magic. You guys may have heard of the like Moonchild sort of ritual thing. He was hooked up with L. Ron Hubbard. They were doing ritual magic together, and literally, like, he integrated and fused in a lot of different ways science with magic. That was his deal. But his whole background, Babylonian. And Babel, by the way, and Babylon, it basically means God's gate, or the gate of the gods. And if you look at the Babylonian glyph, it's a 7-pointed star, and there's one letter in each of the tips of the star. It spells Babylon. And then there's sevens everywhere. Seven is definitely related to ascension, and I've gotten into that in other videos. Check out my 7 Gates to the Great Beyond video if you want to learn more about that. But his whole entire thing was inspired by Babylon and the Whore of Babylon and things like that. So some of you guys are probably familiar with this, but his whole entire thing was that he wanted to send rockets to outer space, and that was like his whole entire dream, right? And so he was pivotal in the development of some of the fuels and technologies and techniques that basically modern rocketry would use to send these rockets upward. So to me, I just kind of wonder if the modern man's version of the Tower of Babel, you see it in the skyscrapers, but I also wonder if you're seeing it with rocketry. So just a thought, right? Nice. I'm going to check the chat and see what's going on. Cool. Awesome. Hello, Joshua the Branch. What is up, dude? There's so many follow-up things I want to ask you about the Tower of Babel. When I was doing research recently over the last few days to prep for this, I thought about you so many times, dude, and I want to pick your brain, and maybe we can do a stream just on Babylon. I don't know, covering the Tower of Babel story as well. I thought of you, I thought of Slick, I thought of some other people as well. And so thanks for being here. We've done shows together on this channel. Check that out. Nico Lenz, how's it going? Hey, I got your text earlier. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I didn't have time to get back to you, but rest assured I received it and it is appreciated. Jason, what's going on? Thank you for being here. Cozy Crone is here. What is up? Once again, I always say this, but familiar faces. What's up, Slick? Nice to see you, man. Let me know if you would be interested in a Tower of Babel or Babylonian sort of weave here on Symbolic Studies with Joshua the Branch. Since you guys are here, I might as well just throw it out there instead of having to send you guys messages or whatever. But anyways, that would be fun, right? Oh, cool. Joshua is down. That would be fun. Party emoji. Nice, nice. All right. Who else is here? My Cherie, hello, hello. Always great to see you. Nice. Jason is in Mexico. That's awesome, dude. What part of Mexico are you in? I want to go back. There's an opportunity for me in Mexico that I've been considering. Nothing crazy. It's just a trip, but there's an opportunity within that trip that I might take advantage of. Maybe, I don't know. Just let me know where you're at. I might be somewhere in your neck of the woods. Perhaps maybe you have things to recommend for me, something like that. Cucumber, what's up? Nice to see you. What's up, Hank? Howdy ho. Thanks for being here. Hey, Jenny G. I love what Dylan said about striving for eloquence in life, honor of our ancestors. Yeah, I totally get that for sure. And I think it's respectable. Absolutely. Hey there, Chance. What's up, man? Interverse podcast is excellent. If you're unfamiliar, check out what he has going on. Much love to Chance and his lady, Jenny G here. And so, yeah, Dee Dee, hello, hello. Let's see. Evil Fandango, thank you so much for being here. And it looks like similar names the further up I go. I always get jealous because I know there's so many smart people in the chat, probably throwing down all sorts of interesting tidbits here and there, and I miss all of it. Oh, Dee Dee's saying earn and earn. That's intriguing. I've never picked up on that before. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, cool, guys. Leaves of Grass. Hey there. Nice to see you. Thanks for hanging out with us and checking out the stream. Moonlander 2, what's good? Sweet, sweet. Astro Pillars, Astrology, howdy ho. You know, one thing I've considered, guys, let me know what you think about this real quick, but I've kind of considered sometimes maybe doing a presentation, just kind of cutting it off when the presentation's done, and then starting a different live stream just to hang out with the chat. And if people want to join and talk about, what I was talking about, we can do that. And then this is kind of like a self-contained presentation. And then the other chat, or the other stream, people can come if they want to. If they're not interested, that's totally fine. And then also, I kind of feel like maybe too is that stream can be temporary. And so it's really just for the people who are interested in this information and like talking about it right then and there. And then maybe that kind of opens it up so that we could talk about maybe more controversial things perhaps. And then once it's done, I just delete it. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Oh, sweet. So Chance here says, Mario, thanks for getting me thinking about Tori, meaning tower, Torre. I don't know if I'm saying that right. That adds a lot of good weaves. Yeah, I could see that, man. I mean, I don't know what weaves obviously you're talking about, but knowing how you think, dude, I'm not surprised at all. So very cool. That's one of the cool things just about showing these cards is just you guys are going to pick up things that I'm not going to pick up on, obviously. And I think it's a beautiful thing. All right. All right. So let me see what's going on down here with the new comments. Mercury Mel, hey there. Nice to see you. Thanks for hanging out and being so supportive. Okay, she's been lurking. Gotcha. I do the same thing. So Pedro, what's up, dude? Another solid presentation. Thank you. You got it, man. Pedro is a homie for sure. And did I say hi to Stacy yet? Hey, Stacy. Cool. All right. So yeah, Josh was saying I like that idea of an after show weave. Yeah, man, I do too. I've thought about it a few times. I haven't pulled the trigger or whatever, but I think that would be a good time. Okay, gotcha. Tori, Thor, Tyr, Mars. Yeah, fuck, dude. Exactly. That's awesome. Super cool. And then Jason here saying that it is tower in Spanish, right? Nice. After show party would be fun. Yeah. We could totally do that sometime. And then, okay, cool. Tyr, the capital of Phoenicia. Nice. That's very interesting. Sweet guys. All right. I think that's going to do it. Oh, sweet. Juan is here. This episode is Hamonk approved. Nice, dude. I alluded to our show next month. So that is who I'm going to be getting down with Kenneth Grant, Symbolism, Tunnels of Set stuff, things like that. And dude, I'm so stoked to talk about that, man. Already writing notes, stuff like that. So anyway, nice. Right on, guys. It is dinner time for me, so I'm gonna get going. But we will definitely do this again for sure. I can't thank you enough. But I do have some final slides here for you all, some final end credits. And the first thing is to thank all of my patrons. So, and I think it's kind of cool that I have a few enough patrons to where I could actually like literally mention everybody. And so I want to get to the point though, obviously, where there's so many I can't do that. But for now, I'm going to do it. So Amy, who is here, hello, thank you so much. Troy, Amanda, Chance, who is also here from the Interverse podcast, Abby, Nicholas, Yakov, Monica, Nomad, who's a homie, Sarah Buck, Julia, LS, Judy, Barbara, Adrian, thank you so much. Crystal, Christina, Eloise, Mia, Kurt, and Lockstep. So you guys, seriously, it warms my heart, having patrons and having a little tribe over there on Patreon. Yeah, every bit goes a long way. If you want to become a patron of the arts of my art, you can do so at patreon.com/symbolicstudies. Every single person who signs up for a Patreon tier receives the elemental study packet. There's all sorts of interesting elemental correspondences going on here. Conversely, if you want to just donate and receive a study packet, it's a name your price offering. So if you want to donate $1, I'll send you a study packet. If you want to donate more, you are more than welcome to. All you have to do is PayPal me or Venmo me or Cash App me. But please, please, please include your email address. That is like a really important thing. So include your email address and I'll send you a link to download the packet. Also, Symbolic Studios. So I'm available for design work, primarily logos, sigils, and honestly, anything digital or print. I love logos. That is like, if I could just do logos only forever, I think that's probably what I do, what I would do. But I'm also available for all of these other things. I mean, I've designed so many different things for people over the years, t-shirts and websites and posters and album covers, tattoos for people. I've done skate decks and all sorts of stuff. So if you are in need of design work, hit me up, especially if you want someone who is more symbolically literate than perhaps the average designer. If you feel like your project requires that, or you would like to work with somebody to perhaps encode something within the design that you need, let me know when we can kind of hash it out and talk about all that stuff, because that's obviously my thing. Also, I'm just showing design work now. So what I'm going to do, probably like from week to week or something, I'll pick out different logos or things that I've done for people. This is just like an example logo that I completed last year for a client. So it's called Rose Dragon Healing Arts. And she wanted this specific dragon. She wanted the rose. We worked it out. I think it looks really nice. And she creates all sorts of products and has services and whatnot. But I'm just showing people just kind of like bits and pieces of my portfolio now, just to show you that, what I do for symbolic studies, a lot of it's very straightforward, but I feel like I'm capable of doing more complex things and detailed things when called upon. Also, I'm available for tarot readings and study sessions. You can email me. You can go to my website, symbolicstudies.com, or you can text me, 503-893-4606. Tarot readings are very organic. I would say I love meeting new people. I love trying to understand people's story and talking about the cards with them. It's kind of like a mini lesson as well, I would say, is that I like to teach while I'm doing tarot. I like to teach people how to do tarot themselves. Study sessions kind of come into play with that. So people have hit me up for symbolic analysis of different kinds. They've wanted help with maybe some of their projects, how to encode it with this type of energy. So people have asked for all sorts of different things, but tarot readings and study sessions, I am available. So hit me up. Also, this is my snail mail address, P.O. Box 930, Carson, Washington, 98610, if you want to send me a letter or something. Also, my girlfriend has a podcast. It's called The Healing Home, and it's here on YouTube at Michelle's Healing Home. She interviewed recently Matt Roski about electroculture, and it was a good interview. She has interviewed people who are in this chat right now, and she's had some amazing guests, and I think she's like 22 episodes deep. So really proud of her. I like what she's doing. We also have a podcast together called Last Thursday. And so we go live every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific on her channel, and she picks a topic. I pick a topic. We don't know what each other wants to talk about. We roll a dice to see who gets to go first. It's kind of a surprise sort of thing for each of us and the audience, I guess. And we usually, get something special to drink, whether it's homemade or we go and get a mead or something like that. And it's just fun. It's super casual. And Michelle is just awesome. And it's kind of like an insight to how we talk just here at home and the types of things we talk about. So it's kind of an open forum. We also really, really engage with the chat too. So if that sounds like a good time, join us every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I believe that'll do it, guys. So with that said, I'm going to check the chat one last time and see what's going on. Juan says he wants a homunculus sigil. Sounds good. We can definitely do that if you're really interested. That's super funny, man. Now you're making me think, dude. Like, what would that look like? Right. Right on. Josh was just saying, thank you all for sharing time and space. Have a good weaving. Nice. Awesome deal. Slick is saying big love to the symbolic ninjas. Check out Slick's channel. He goes so deep. He brings up stuff that I've literally never heard anywhere else before. He has a very unique way of decoding, and his symbolic awareness is definitely through the roof. Love that guy. And that'll do it, guys. All right. Much love. Until next time.